The sun was just beginning to dip behind the rugged horizon when Cassidy Flynn stood frozen on the weathered platform, clutching a letter adorned with Phoebe's face. A face he knew by heart after countless long winter nights. The dry wind carried a faint scent of dust and sweat as the stagecoach rumbled closer, its wheels creaking like an old ghost moving through the heat-blurred air. Cassidy's eyes traced every line of her smile, every curl of her blonde hair, every spark of her blue eyes, dreams wrapped in a fragile hope for a new beginning. But as the coach's door swung open with a squeal of rusty hinges, what stepped out made his blood run cold. The woman was a stranger. Dark-haired, her hair pulled back tight, her face carved with an austerity that didn't belong in this quiet frontier town. Her almond-shaped eyes flicked over the gathered crowd with sharp, calculating precision, missing nothing. Her clothes were rough-spun, plain, far from the lacy dresses or simple dresses Phoebe would have worn for such a meeting. Instead, she clutched a small wooden box pressed firmly against her chest, as if it hid treasures or secrets too dangerous to reveal. The stagecoach driver, grumbling about incorrect papers, handed her a single battered bag, then climbed back aboard without a word. She stood still, her gaze flickering from face to face, searching, perhaps for someone, perhaps for something only she could see. Cassidy stared at the letter again, then back at this strange woman. This wasn't Phoebe Langston. No, not even close. Yet, somehow, she was looking directly at him now. Her expression unreadable, her eyes locking onto his like she knew him, knew this place. Like she belonged here in this dusty, sun-bleached station. She held up a scrap of paper, scrawled with unfamiliar characters that looked like tiny, frantic drawings, her lips moving with words he'd never heard before, each syllable sharp, urgent, and deliberate. "Ma'am, I think there's been some mistake." Cassidy's voice rasped out, rougher than he'd intended. His mind raced, replaying every word he'd practiced in the quiet of his cabin, every hope he'd clung to for this encounter. But none of those rehearsed lines fit this moment. None could prepare him for what was unfolding. Her face shifted. Confusion shadowed her features as she looked from his letter to her own paper, then back again. She pointed to herself, then to him, her head tilting with a question he couldn't decipher. The language sounded foreign, alien, and yet her intent was clear. Cassidy shook his head slowly, a flicker of doubt igniting in his chest. "I'm Cassidy Flynn. I was expecting someone else," he said, holding up Phoebe's picture. Her eyes widened slightly as she studied it. Then, without warning, she reached into her bag and pulled out a different photograph. One of a man with a thick beard and kind eyes Cassidy had never seen before. She showed him that picture, then pointed to herself again, repeating those strange words with more emphasis, more insistence. A terrible, icy realization began to take root in Cassidy's mind. Two people, two letters, two worlds, twisted together in a tangled web that made no sense, yet felt as real as the dust beneath their feet. The shadows stretched longer now, and the truth lurked just beyond reach, waiting to reveal itself in the cold, unforgiving frontier. But how in tarnation did such a colossal mistake even happen? That was the question haunting Cassidy as he watched the woman's shoulders slump beneath the weight of her realization. She looked around the sparse station platform, as if for the first time seeing the cold, unforgiving truth. An endless sea of dust and dirt, stretching out in every direction, with no familiar landmarks to guide her. Her eyes flicked to the departing stagecoach, already swallowed by a cloud of settling grime. and her lips parted as if to speak again, this time with a quiet worry that needed no words. Her hands gestured helplessly toward the fading carriage, conveying a silent message of confusion and dread. Suddenly, from the shadows of the general store, Samuel Crow stepped forward, his face lined with weather and worry, creasing into a grimace as he approached. "Problem, Cassidy?" he asked, voice low and gravelly. "This ain't the German girl you've been expecting for months." "No, it's not her." Cassidy's chest grew hot with a mix of disappointment and mounting frustration, an ache that refused to be ignored. Someone, somehow, had bungled the arrangements badly enough to land this stranger here, in the middle of nowhere, with her fate hanging in the balance. Samuel's gaze shifted over the woman, with a discomfort that was plain to see. "She can't stay here," he muttered, voice edged with urgency. "Next stage ain't due for 2 weeks. 2 long weeks in this godforsaken place." The woman, catching the tone of their words, seemed to grasp the problem in her own way. Her grip tightened on the wooden box she carried, knuckles white, and she took a hesitant step backward as if preparing to run. But where could she go? This sprawling wilderness offered no refuge, no sanctuary, only endless, jagged horizon. And that's when Cassidy's eyes caught something else. Something dark and troubling beneath her torn dress sleeve, a stain on her bag that looked eerily like dried blood. The sight of it sent a ripple through him, changing the entire tenor of the moment. That stain made everything else seem secondary. His frustration melted away, replaced by a sharper, more urgent instinct. Without thinking, Cassidy stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he studied her more intently. The woman noticed his gaze flickering to her bag and instinctively jerked it behind her back. But Cassidy had already caught sight of more damage, tears perhaps, or scars hidden beneath the fabric. "Ma'am," Cassidy said softly, voice steady but cautious. "Are you hurt?" She looked down at her torn sleeve, fingers brushing the fabric as if to check for injury, then shook her head with a quick, practiced motion. Only her movements were too deliberate, too controlled, like someone trying not to show pain, trying to hide something darker beneath the surface. Samuel's expression darkened further as he picked up on the same clues: the bloodstain, the careful but tense movements. "Cassidy?" Samuel muttered, voice low and serious. "Maybe we ought to get Doc Miller to take a look at her." The woman's eyes widened in alarm at the suggestion, her whole body tensing as if to flee. She shook her head vehemently, backing toward the platform's edge, clutching that battered wooden box as if her life depended on it. Whatever was inside was more precious than her own safety, more vital than her health. She seemed more terrified of losing the box than of any injury she might have sustained. There's a darkness lurking beneath this quiet frontier evening, a mystery that's heavy in the air. How in tarnation did a Chinese woman wind up with plans for a German bride? What twisted path led her here? And where's your Phoebe? That's the question Cassidy's been dodging like a rattlesnake in the grass. If this stranger's standing in Phoebe's place, then what happened to the woman Cassidy had been writing to for 8 long months? The woman whose letters had been the only warmth in the coldest winter he'd ever known. That letter writer had understood him in ways words never could. Until now, the woman sitting before him was giving off signals, clearer than words. Her hand slipping into her bag again, pulling out a bundle of crumpled letters tied with rough twine. The outside was scrawled in English, but the address was all wrong. Not Cassidy's ranch, no. This was Pine Ridge Settlement, nearly 100 miles north, beyond the reaches of any familiar trail. She pointed to the letters, then to herself, then toward the distant stagecoach's tracks. Her silent message was as plain as the dust on her boots. She's meant for somewhere else. Someone else entirely. Pine Ridge. Cassidy muttered under his breath. That's where old Henrik Larsson's been trying to rope himself a wife for nearly 5 years. An impossible dream in that lonely stretch. The woman's eyes lit up when she heard the name Henrik, recognition flashing across her face like a flash of lightning. But that flicker of familiarity only deepened the worry etched into her brow. Her gaze shifted to the sinking sun, then to the empty stretch of road ahead. And she muttered something in her native tongue. A prayer, maybe, or a desperate plea. Whatever she'd been through on her journey, whatever bloodstains marked her belongings, time was running out. And Cassidy suddenly saw that he might be the only thing standing between her and a terrible mistake. One that could cost her everything. Without overthinking, before his mind could talk him into hesitation, he made his choice. Samuel, load up the wagon. We're taking her to Pine Ridge. The older man's eyebrows shot up with surprise. That's a long, hard ride through rough country, he warned. And you don't even know if Henrik's still waiting for a bride. But Cassidy was already moving, gathering his gear, driven by a sense of urgency he couldn't ignore. The woman watched him, sharp-eyed and silent, following every gesture even if she didn't understand the words. When he motioned toward the wagon, she nodded quickly, gathering her belongings with a hurried desperation. As she reached for her bag, a sudden wince crossed her face. Her hand pressed against her ribs, the movement pulling her dress tight across her side. Cassidy's eyes caught the dark patch spreading beneath her clothing. Something worse than a bruise, bleeding and unseen until now. Whatever injury she was hiding was worsening, and time was slipping through her fingers. "Ma'am," Cassidy said firmly, stepping closer. "You're bleeding." She tried to shake her head, but her knees buckled, trembling with the effort to stay upright. Cassidy caught her elbow, feeling the tremor that ran through her frame, the desperate attempt to hold herself together. The wooden box she clutched slipped from her grasp, threatening to crash to the platform. For a moment, it seemed like it might shatter, until she caught it with reflexes born of desperation, clutching it tightly as if her very life depended on it. In the fading light of dusk, a stark question haunts the air. How far would a man go to hide the truth when shadows threaten to expose him? Cassidy's voice broke softly, a rare gentleness coloring his words as he looked into the woman's haunted eyes. "Listen," he said. "I don't need to know what went down on that stage, nor do I want to pry. But you're hurt, badly enough to slow you down in a place that's growing darker by the minute. You've got a choice. Trust me to get you out of here, or face the night alone, out in the wilderness where danger lurks behind every shadow." His words hung heavy, like a warning carried on the wind. The woman studied him, her gaze searching for a flicker of recognition, a sign that she could trust him. After a long moment, her shoulders relaxed just enough, and she nodded faintly, a fragile acceptance that this stranger might be her salvation. Suddenly, Samuel appeared, clutching a battered leather satchel filled with supplies. "Let me tend to that first," he said, voice steady but cautious. "Can't have you bleeding out before you make it to safety." Without resistance, the woman allowed Samuel to approach, her eyes never leaving the wooden box she guarded with a fierce protectiveness. She set it down beside her feet with deliberate care, her fingers trembling as she exposed the jagged gash along her ribs. It looked fresh, precise, not from a stumble or a fall, but inflicted with intent, as if a blade had been wielded with deadly purpose. When Samuel's hand froze in midair at the sight, Cassidy caught the silent exchange of looks between them. A shared suspicion that this wound was no accident, no mere misstep on a rough trail. Someone had wanted her hurt badly enough to leave a mark, and Cassidy's gut told him he was starting to understand why she kept that box so fiercely close. The woman endured Samuel's careful work without a sound, but her gaze kept drifting to the horizon, tense, alert. She was listening, watching for something beyond Cassidy's comprehension, perhaps a sound on the wind, a sign of pursuit. Her growing unease was impossible to ignore. When Samuel finished, she reached out immediately for her wooden box, her fingers trembling as she clasped it tight. But just as her hand closed around the worn wood, the distant thunder of approaching hooves shattered the silence. Dust billowed up in a rising cloud, and the woman's body went rigid, her face draining of color as she recognized the riders coming over the ridge. A figure or a threat she knew all too well. Her grip on Cassidy's arm suddenly sharpened, nails digging deep into his sleeve, her voice rushing in rapid, urgent words in her native tongue. She pointed toward the approaching dust, her eyes wide with dread, her voice thick with fear. A warning that needed no translation. From the shimmering heat of the plains, 3 mounted figures emerged, their horses drenched with sweat from a relentless ride. The leader was a broad-shouldered man with a sheriff's badge catching the last rays of the setting sun. But Cassidy sensed something off about him. A too eager stance, a focus that seemed misplaced, almost hungry. "Sheriff Dalton from Copper Creek," Samuel muttered, voice tense. "What's he doing this far from his turf?" Cassidy's eyes narrowed, studying the man's posture as he dismounted, flanked by 2 deputies. Dalton's smile stretched too wide. A mask that didn't quite reach his eyes, a predator's grin hiding something darker beneath. On the dusty stagecoach platform, a haunting question hangs in the air. What if the woman who slipped through the shadows isn't just fleeing from a theft, but caught in a web of lies that could unravel everything? Today, a lone Chinese woman might have crossed this very stage. Her steps hurried, her breath shallow and ragged, as if she'd just escaped hell's grip. She traveled alone, carrying something stolen. Something heavy enough to make her tremble. She edged closer to Cassidy, using his sturdy frame as a shield, a fragile barrier against the open sky and prying eyes. Yet, on this exposed wooden stage, there was no hiding. No secret could stay hidden for long. Cassidy's voice broke the tense silence, calm but edged with suspicion. "What sort of stolen property are we talking about?" he asked, keeping his tone steady despite the pounding of his own heartbeat. The woman's quick, shallow breaths betrayed her fear. "Gold coins from Millerville," she managed in a muffled voice. "About $3,000 worth. Taken from the bank just 2 days ago." Dalton's sharp gaze shifted from Cassidy to the woman, narrowing as he studied her. The description the banker had given matched her perfectly. Yet something about the story didn't sit right. If she'd robbed that bank in Millerville, how was she now riding this stagecoach, heading for Pine Ridge, clutching letters addressed to Henrik Larson? The timeline was a tangled knot of contradictions, and every second that passed made the puzzle darker. The woman seemed to understand enough of their words to sense she was under suspicion. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance as she shook her head vigorously, clutching a bundle of letters to her chest, desperately trying to prove her innocence with paper she hoped would clear her name. Dalton barely glanced at the letters. Those could be forged as easily as a snake's forked tongue. What caught his attention was that wooden box she guarded so fiercely. The woman pressed the container tighter against her chest and took a cautious step back. For the first time since her arrival, her eyes met Cassidy's. Dark pools of pleading that hinted at a fragile trust. She spoke one word in heavily accented English. "Please." Cassidy's instincts kicked in before he could think. He stepped between her and Dalton, a wall of protection. "You got a warrant for searching her belongings?" Cassidy asked, voice steady, eyes locked on the sheriff. "Don't need one for stolen property in plain sight," Dalton replied, his hand drifting toward his gun. "Step aside, Flynn. This isn't your concern anymore, but it's something I need to see." Dalton's tone carried a weight that didn't quite ring true. There was a rehearsed quality to his words, as if he'd practiced this confrontation during the long, grueling ride from Copper Creek. And the woman's terror, was it genuine fear of being caught, or something deeper? Her trembling was more than the usual panic. It felt like she was fighting a losing battle against the truth. Cassidy noticed the subtle signs. Fresh scratches on Dalton's knuckles, a tiny tear in his vest that looked suspiciously like it had come from a desperate clawing. Those scratches told a story that clashed with Dalton's calm facade. Fights that had turned violent, someone fighting back with desperate fury. His gaze shifted to the woman's hands, nails broken, knuckles scraped and raw, marks of a struggle that mirrored Dalton's own injuries. Cassidy's voice cut through the thickening air, low but clear, carrying farther than he thought. Dalton's jaw clenched tight as a rattlesnake's strike, knowing the news doesn't travel fast in these parts. Maybe the sheriff's notices still haven't crawled this far. Or perhaps there was never a robbery at all. Cassidy kept his hand hovering near his gun, eyes sharp as a hawk, watching the tense dance of the deputies as they took their positions, ready for a crossfire that could ignite at any moment. Maybe you're just after what's in that box, Cassidy thought, betting that a sheriff's word carries more weight than a foreign woman who can't speak a word of English. She was tense too, sensing the danger without understanding the language. Pressing the wooden crate close against her chest, whispering something in her native tongue, a quiet prayer lost in the dust. Behind the counter of Samuel's store, the old shopkeeper had gone silent. But Cassidy caught the faint click. Someone was cocking a rifle, slow and deliberate. The old man might not grasp every detail, but he knew corruption when he saw it. This was a powder keg ready to blow. Dalton's voice cut through the tense pause, low and deadly. "Last warning, Flynn," he barked, hand now resting on his gun's butt, ready to draw. "Hand over the woman and what she's carrying, or this gets real messy for everyone involved." Cassidy's muscles tensed, knowing full well this was the moment of no return. "Because I've got a hunch," Cassidy thought, narrowing his eyes. "I'm thinking you're the one who gave her that knife wound. I'm thinking you tried to snatch what she's got, and she fought back with more fire than you bargained for." Her eyes widened as she caught enough of the conversation to realize Cassidy was on her side. She looked between him and the sheriff, then did something that caught everyone off guard. With a swift motion, she opened the wooden box just enough for Cassidy to glimpse inside. Gold coins shimmered in the bright afternoon sun, but these weren't the loose, stolen kind. No, they were arranged in neat rows, wrapped in silk cloth, with tiny paper tags bearing Chinese characters, family savings, not loot meant for the bank. A lifetime's worth of hoarded wealth, probably everything she owned in the world. Her dowry, Cassidy realized with a jolt. That's not stolen money. That's her marriage portion for Henrik Larsson. Dalton's face twisted from confident to desperate, like a gambler who's just shown his hand too soon. He'd revealed too much, his greed, his recklessness. Now his only options were to seize what he wanted by brute force or retreat empty-handed. The sheriff's hand twitched at his side, fingers ready to draw. But before a shot could be fired, the woman did something nobody saw coming. She hurled the wooden box toward Samuel's store, then threw herself sideways off the platform, rolling behind Cassidy's wagon like a shot from a rattlesnake. The coins burst free in the air, scattering across the wooden planks like fallen stars caught in the dust. Glinting in the fading light, they sparkled like a promise of hope, or perhaps a curse, depending on who reached for them first. In the chaos of diving for cover, reaching for weapons, nobody noticed the second stagecoach rolling in from the opposite direction, its wheels kicking up a cloud of dust. Gunfire cracked across the platform as Cassidy dove behind the water trough, splinters exploding where he'd just been standing. In the shadowed dust of the frontier town, a haunting question lingers. What price would you pay for a single moment of safety? Her dark eyes, like midnight storms, flicked sharply as she tracked every move Dalton's deputies made, their figures darting and ducking across the cracked wooden boards. Inside his store, Samuel's rifle cracked like thunder, shattering the tense silence and forcing one deputy to dive behind a hitching post, desperate for cover. But they were cornered, outnumbered, outgunned, with no place to run across the endless, unforgiving plains that stretched in every direction. The stagecoach, heavy with its cargo of hope and danger, thundered forward, heedless of the gunfire. Its wheels spun faster, the driver whipping the horses into a frenzy, veins bulging on his neck as dust swirled behind him like a ghostly trail. It was coming faster now, closer, heading straight toward the platform with deadly purpose. From behind a battered wooden crate, Dalton's voice boomed, thick with frustration and fury. "Give it up, Flynn," he yelled. All this chaos, all this bloodshed, over some foreign woman and her glittering gold. But both men knew better. It wasn't about riches anymore. No, this was about a sheriff who thought he could prey on travelers, far from justice, with no one left to stop him. And about a woman whose only crime was being caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, clutching something far more valuable than gold. Her gaze sharpened as she caught Cassidy's eye. She pointed toward the scattered coins glittering in the dirt, fool's treasure, shimmering like a mirage. She shook her head fiercely, then made a quick throwing gesture, telling him to forget the money. Her message was clear. What was gold compared to their lives? Cassidy's eyes flicked to the approaching coach, now close enough to see the driver's face. A young man, fierce and resolute, whipped the horses harder than any sane man would dare on this treacherous ground. Behind him, rifle barrels peeked through the coach's windows, glinting ominously in the late afternoon sun. Dalton saw them, and his confidence wavered. The odds, once in his favor, began to shift like a gusty wind, threatening to turn the tide. "Mount up," he barked at his deputies, voice sharp with command. "We're pulling out." But the woman, she had other plans. While all eyes fixated on the speeding coach, she darted from behind the wagon like a shadow, her hands moving with deadly precision to gather her scattered coins. Her movements told a story, one of quick thinking, of someone who'd had to pack up and run under threat of death more times than she cared to remember. Cassidy shouted, "Stay down!" But she ignored him, her focus unbreakable. As a bullet whistled past her shoulder, tearing through the fabric of her already ragged dress, she kept on, driven by instinct and desperation. The stagecoach slammed onto the platform with a deafening crash, shaking the entire structure to its core. Before it had even come to a halt, armed men spilled out, not lawmen, not rough-and-tumble drifters, but men in dark, disciplined clothing, soldiers of some foreign order, their weapons trained with deadly intent. The woman looked up from her hurried collection of coins, her face tense as she spoke rapidly in her native tongue. The lead man responded with relief, then turned his cold gaze on Dalton. His voice cut through the chaos, heavy with accusation. "You've caused trouble for my sister," he said in accented but clear English. In the dim glow of a setting sun, Cassidy watched a tense standoff unfold like a scene from a nightmare. Sheriff's deputies cornered, outgunned, and trapped in a circle of hardened faces. The air was thick with the scent of dust and danger, every man armed and ready, knowing full well the fury that would ignite if justice wasn't served. But amid the suspense, Cassidy's gaze sharpened. Something was off. These weren't mere relatives come to protect a woman. They were seasoned fighters, professionals who traveled miles, not just to free one woman's dowry, but to deliver a message that cut deeper than words. The leader stepped forward from the shadows, his rifle steady and unflinching, its barrel pressed against Dalton's chest. "My name is Chen Wei," he announced, voice calm but edged with authority. "This woman is Liwi, my sister. She carries papers, more than just wedding plans, important documents." Cassidy's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Why would a woman's dowry warrant such a show of force? Why risk so much for what seemed like a simple marriage arrangement? The answer was darker. These papers revealed truths that could topple entire empires of corruption. Samuel, from his store nearby, kept his rifle trained on the last deputy, eyes narrowing as he listened. Chen Wei's expression hardened further. Documents that prove Chinese workers built more of this railroad than anyone admits. Evidence of unpaid wages, broken promises, men who lost their lives chasing dreams that turned to dust. Liwi's words tumbled out rapidly in Chinese, her gestures urgent and pointed toward Cassidy. Chen Wei's stern face softened just slightly as he listened, perhaps realizing that this stranger wasn't an enemy, but a key piece in a much larger game. "My sister says you protected her when no one else would," Chen Wei said quietly to Cassidy, voice steady. "She says you risked everything for her dowry, even though you believed she was the wrong woman." Cassidy, still crouched behind the water trough, met her gaze, his voice rough. "She's the wrong woman," he admitted. "But that doesn't justify what that corrupt sheriff tried to do, to her or to what she carries." Dalton's desperation grew as he listened to the exchange, his hopes slipping. He made one last plea, voice trembling with false bravado. "You're all making a mistake. I'm a lawman. These folks are criminals with stolen goods. You won't find justice here." But Chen Wei's calm voice cut through the tension, unwavering. "You won't mind if we take you back to Copper Creek," he said evenly. "Let the town decide. We can show them the knife you used on my sister. We can compare it to her wound. And those papers, your so-called evidence, let's see if they hold up under scrutiny." The color drained from Dalton's face like water from a cracked bucket. The thought of returning to face questions with proof of his lies was a nightmare he desperately wanted to avoid. His hand clenched around his gun, but the odds weren't in his favor. These men knew how to wield their weapons, and he was surrounded. Meanwhile, Liwi, gathering her coins with careful fingers, slowly approached Cassidy. Her movements were cautious, her injury making each step a challenge. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and helped him to his feet behind the water trough. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice thick with a heavy accent, but sincere. Her dark eyes held a fierce intelligence, a quiet strength that had carried her through the perilous journey. In the fading light of a frontier town, she wasn't the German bride Cassidy had envisioned, yet her presence carried a quiet power that tugged at something deeper in him, something he was only beginning to understand. The question hung heavy in the air. "What happens now?" Cassidy asked Chen Wei, voice low but edged with uncertainty. "Is she still headed to Pine Ridge to marry Henrik Larsen?" Liwi and her brother exchanged a long, measured glance, silent words passing between them like shadows in the dusk. When Chen Wei finally spoke, his words cut through Cassidy's assumptions like a blade, reshaping everything he thought he knew. "There's no Henrik Larsen," Chen Wei said softly. That name was a lie, a cover story, a reason for her to travel this route safely. Cassidy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Then why is she here?" he demanded. Chen Wei's gaze softened with pride, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "She's meeting with railroad men in Denver. She speaks 5 languages, keeps meticulous records. Better than most men they've hired. Her marriage is protection, a way to move unseen, untroubled by suspicion." The unspoken truth settled in the air. This was a shield, a disguise to keep her safe amid the chaos of progress. Chen Wei glanced at his sister, pride shining through his calm. "She's here to ensure that Chinese workers get what's owed to them: wages, dignity, justice." Liwi nodded, her voice deliberate and steady. "I have names, numbers, the truth about who built this railroad, disguised behind a simple deception." Cassidy watched as the layers of lies peeled back. A lone Chinese woman traveling alone was a target. Danger lurked in every shadow, suspicion dogging her steps. But a bride, heading to meet her intended, she was seen as harmless, left unchallenged. Just then, Dalton saw his chance amid the chaos. As everyone's focus sharpened on the unfolding truth, he lunged for his horse, shadows cloaking his escape. But Samuel's rifle cracked like thunder through the cracked glass of the store window, and the sheriff's body crumpled to the dirt with a bullet through his leg. "That's for trying to rob a woman under my roof," Samuel barked, voice echoing with grim resolve. Chen Wei's men moved swiftly, subdued the remaining deputies, sealing their fate. Justice would come. Dalton's crooked lawman career, however, was over. Cassidy's gaze sharpened on Liwi. "What happens now?" he asked, voice edged with cautious hope. She studied him silently for a long moment, then spoke in Chinese to her brother. Chen Wei translated, amusement flickering in his tone. "She says the plan was to press on to Denver after Pine Ridge. But plans change when the unexpected appears." Liwi stepped closer, close enough that Cassidy could catch the faint scent of jasmine lingering in her dark hair, an unexpected fragility amid the storm. "You help me when you think I am wrong," she said slowly, voice like a whisper in the wind. "That's what tells me who you are inside." "And what did it tell you?" She paused, eyes piercing. "That maybe I find the right person in the wrong place." A shift stirred in Cassidy's chest, something unspoken, a recognition that transcended letters, plans, or expectations. This woman had faced death with courage, guarded what mattered most, and shown a strength that outshone many who carried guns and badges. "Would you stay?" he wondered aloud, voice barely more than a breath. Just long enough to see that wound healed, to see her safe. Cheney called his men together, their boots kicking up a cloud of dust as they prepared to escort Dalton and his deputies straight to the long arm of justice. Just as they mounted up, he sidled over to Cassidy, clutching a plain wooden box that looked as humble as a miner's dirt pile. "Keep this safe for her," he said softly, eyes flickering with gravity. "She's chosen to trust you with something more precious than gold, something that weighs heavy with hope and memory." As the sun dipped lower, casting a fiery glow across the barren plains, Cassidy realized that sometimes the wrong parcel delivered to your doorstep can turn out to be exactly what you need. That loneliness that once haunted him, pushing him to seek out a bride from across the miles, faded away like morning mist. In its place grew something real, unexpected, fragile, and infinitely more valuable than any arranged union. If you found this tale gripping, click the video on your screen now. Another story where fate and bravery clash in ways that will leave you breathless. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you'd like to help us tell more stories like these, consider dropping a super chat.